The Galactic Empire was, without question, the single most dominant force in the known universe. It stretched across thousands of star systems, its fleets outnumbering the stars themselves, and its rulers had long since forgotten what the word defeat even meant. For centuries, they had crushed rebellions, toppled civilizations, and turned entire planets into smoldering reminders of what happened to those who defied them. Grand Imperator Sci Fi sat upon his throne, a grotesquely large piece of architecture designed more to intimidate than to be comfortable. Not that comfort was much of a concern when one ruled the galaxy with an iron claw. His many eyes, each independently scrolling through a floating array of reports, flickered with mild irritation as he listened to yet another admiral drone on about yet another insignificant species daring to resist imperial rule. "Let me be certain I understand this correctly," Sci Fi said, his voice thick with condescension. "You are telling me that a human colony, has refused our generous offer of unconditional surrender." The admiral, a four-armed reptilian creature, gulped audibly. "Why, yes, Supreme One. They, sent back a rather aggressive response." Sci Fi narrowed his eyes. "How aggressive?" The admiral hesitated, then pressed a button on his wrist console. The Imperial Chamber's massive holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a simple video message. A human, presumably some low-ranking officer, stared into the camera. He gave a casual salute, took a sip from a steaming cup of something, and then, with all the seriousness of a man ordering a sandwich, said, "Come and get us, you overgrown space slugs." Sci Fi blinked. The entire War Council remained silent. "Excuse me?" the Grand Imperator finally asked, as if the sheer audacity of the message had personally offended his ancestors. The Admiral cleared his throat. There was also an attachment. Sci Fi waved impatiently, and the screen changed. A single image appeared, a crudely drawn sketch of what could only be interpreted as a grotesquely exaggerated alien being, presumably Sci Fi himself, getting kicked by an oversized human boot. Beneath it, in jagged, handwritten text, were the words, "This you?" Silence filled the chamber once again. A nearby scribe, a species that evolved to thrive in bureaucracy, made a nervous clicking sound before fainting outright. Sci Fi exhaled slowly, as if reminding himself that vaporizing his own officers in frustration was, technically, not the most productive use of his time. "They mock us," he said at last, his voice dangerously low. "They actually mock us." The Admiral nodded. "Yes, Supreme One. Quite, flagrantly. And you say these humans have, what, a handful of warships? A few outdated planetary defenses? No allies." "Correct, Supreme One." Sci Fi sat back in his throne, tenting his clawed fingers. "Then explain to me, Admiral, why is this colony still standing?" The Admiral swallowed hard, shifting nervously. "Well, our initial strike force encountered some unexpected resistance." Sci Fi's eyes twitched. "Unexpected?" The holoscreen changed again, displaying the wreckage of what had once been an Imperial dreadnought. A ship 3 miles long, bristling with weaponry, designed to obliterate entire fleets. It was now little more than twisted metal, floating lifelessly in space. Sci Fi felt something new, something strange, something he hadn't felt in centuries. A tinge of concern. "How?" he began, his voice deceptively calm. "Did a species barely capable of interstellar travel do this?" The Admiral looked like he would very much prefer to be anywhere else. "There are reports, Supreme One. They say it was a single human." Silence. Then laughter. The War Council erupted into amused hissing and clicking noises. Various generals shaking their heads at the absurdity of such a claim. Sci Fi did not laugh. The last time an empire underestimated a primitive species, it had cost them 600 star systems. And while Sci Fi personally enjoyed watching civilizations crumble beneath his empire's might, he was not fond of surprises. He leaned forward. "Tell me, Admiral, What exactly does this single human look like? The Admiral hesitated before pulling up an image. The hologram projected a human figure, clad in advanced combat armor, standing atop the wreckage of a destroyed Imperial transport. The man had a relaxed stance, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, as if he had all the time in the universe. His face was partially covered by a combat visor, but what little was visible conveyed a singular message. He was not afraid. Sci studied the image. He had seen warriors before. He had seen killers, tyrants, and champions. But something about this man, about his posture, his expression, set off every primal warning bell in his brain. "And what," Sci asked, his voice cold, "is this human's designation?" The Admiral licked his lips. "The rebels call him the super soldier." More laughter from the council. Sci let them have their moment, then raised a single clawed finger. The room fell silent. "A single warrior," Sci said, still staring at the image, "has destroyed one of my dreadnoughts, has slaughtered my best soldiers, has made a mockery of our empire." The Admiral nodded hesitantly. "Why, yes, Supreme One." Sci's mandibles clicked together as he turned to the assembled council. "Then why?" he asked, his voice dripping with venom. "Are you laughing?" The mood shifted instantly. Generals straightened, their amusement evaporating under the weight of their leader's glare. Sci turned back to the image, something dark stirring in his chest. "Send a battalion," he ordered. "No, send 3 battalions. I want this super soldier annihilated. I want his armor melted down. I want his name erased from history." The Admiral nodded quickly, hurrying to relay the command. Sci continued to stare at the image long after the meeting had ended. The human looked so small, so insignificant against the backdrop of a shattered war machine. And yet, for the first time in his reign, Sci felt something gnawing at the edge of his mind. Not fear, no, not yet, but something very, very close. The jungle was alive, but not in the way the Empire's soldiers were used to. Back home, their war simulations had prepared them for urban warfare, planetary sieges, even asteroid base infiltrations. But this was different. The air was thick with humidity. The towering alien trees cast shifting shadows, and something was watching them. Lieutenant Vorst adjusted his visor, scanning the dense foliage. His squad had landed an hour ago, boots crunching against damp earth as they advanced cautiously through the undergrowth. According to the Supreme Command, their mission was straightforward: track down and eliminate a lone human insurgent. Vorst didn't understand why they were wasting time on one man. The Galactic Empire had entire fleets at its disposal. Whole planets surrendered at the mere mention of an invasion. Yet here they were, creeping through some miserable jungle, looking for a primitive creature that should have been long dead. "Squad, spread out," Vorsk ordered, his voice laced with irritation. "Thermals on. The moment you see him, don't hesitate. Burn him down." His soldiers fanned out, each one clad in state-of-the-art combat armor, their weapons capable of melting through tank plating. There was no way a single human could pose a threat. And yet, there was that feeling again. Something wasn't right. A rustle to his left made him freeze. He turned sharply, weapon raised. Nothing, just the leaves shifting in the wind. "Probably just some wildlife," one of the troopers muttered. Vorst grunted. "If you're scared of a few trees, maybe you should have joined the logistics division." The squad chuckled, tension easing slightly. Then Private Karst's head exploded. 1 second, he was standing there, scanning the jungle. The next, a silent projectile punched clean through his helmet, leaving nothing behind but a steaming hole where his face used to be. His body toppled forward like a felled tree, his rifle slipping from lifeless fingers. Silence. Then chaos. "Contact!" someone shouted. The soldiers spun in different directions, firing wildly into the trees. Bright energy bolts slashed through the jungle, scorching leaves, igniting the underbrush. The dense foliage lit up with flashes of red and blue, but there was no target. Nothing but shadows and panic. "Where is he?" a trooper screamed. Another soldier dropped, a razor-sharp combat knife buried in his throat. He gurgled once, then fell backwards, his own blood bubbling from his lips. Vorsk's eyes darted across his HUD. No movement, no heat signatures. That was impossible. Then something moved, a blur between the trees. Vorsk barely had time to register the shape before it was upon them. A human figure, clad in dark, advanced combat armor, not running, gliding through the battlefield like a phantom. Too fast, too precise. The super soldier opened fire. Vorsk roared. His men obeyed, weapons unloading a storm of plasma rounds toward the figure. The jungle lit up, the night turning into daylight hellfire. Trees shattered, dirt exploded into the air, and for a moment, Vorsk thought they had him. Then the human vanished. "What the hell?" one soldier gasped. Something slammed into his chest, a single pulse round, and he was launched 10 feet back, hitting the ground with a sickening crunch. Vorsk turned, breathing hard. This wasn't a man. This was something else. The human was on them now, moving in close, too close, and suddenly, rifles were useless. A trooper swung his weapon like a club. The super soldier ducked, caught the trooper's wrist, and snapped it with a single twist. The alien howled, only for a pistol round to silence him permanently. Another tried to run. The super soldier didn't shoot him. He let him run. That was somehow worse. Vorsk finally saw his face, or at least, the part not obscured by the sleek black helmet. Cold, calculating, a predator studying its prey. This was not a soldier defending his home. This was a hunter. Vorsk swallowed, gripping his rifle tighter than ever before. "Hold your ground," he ordered, but even he heard the tremor in his voice. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Then another soldier dropped, a blade buried in his spine. Vorsk's vision blurred with pure terror. This can't be happening. He was a lieutenant in the Galactic Empire. They were the greatest military force in history. So why did it feel like they were the ones being hunted? He turned, too late. The super soldier was already there. A brutal punch caved in the helmet of the nearest trooper, the force so powerful it lifted him off his feet. Another soldier tried to grapple him, a mistake. With inhuman strength, the super soldier caught him by the throat and hurled him into a tree, spine shattering on impact. Then silence. Vorsk stood there, breathing heavily, the steaming remains of his squad lying around him. The jungle had gone quiet. It was just him now. The super soldier took a step forward, weapon lowered. Not rushing, not attacking, waiting. "Do it," Vorsk snarled, gripping his rifle. "Kill me and get it over with, you monster." The super soldier tilted his head slightly. Then he spoke. "Run." Vorsk froze. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't even threatening. It was bored, as if he wasn't worth the effort. "Run," the super soldier repeated. "Tell them what happened here." Vorsk hesitated, shame burning in his chest. He was an Imperial officer. His kind did not retreat. And yet, his feet were already moving. Branches slapped against his armor as he fled through the jungle, lungs burning, hands shaking. He didn't stop running. Not when the comms buzzed in his ear. Not when command demanded a status report. And certainly not when, in the last flickering moments of his visor cam, he saw the super soldier standing there, watching him go. Not chasing, not concerned, waiting, like a wolf letting a wounded animal return to the herd. Vorsk would never forget that look, and neither, he knew, would the Empire. The Galactic Empire had conquered thousands of worlds, crushed countless rebellions, and silenced entire civilizations with overwhelming force. It had never known fear, until now. Across every Imperial comm channel, a single message was spreading like wildfire. It came in broken transmissions, garbled distress signals, and terrified whispers. One by one, outposts went silent. Reinforcements were sent and never reported back. Entire battalions vanished. The message was always the same. He's here. On board the command ship ISS Dominion, Admiral Ritter paced in front of the holographic war table, his claws tapping anxiously against his armored belt. The battle map was updating in real time, and he hated what he was seeing. It was like watching a disease spread, one red marker after another, representing fallen platoons, flickered out of existence. "This is absurd," Ritter muttered. "We are the Empire. We do not lose to a single man." His second-in-command, Captain Lurok, looked pale. "Sir, if I may, this isn't a man. It's something else." Ritter scoffed. "Ridiculous. He bleeds, doesn't he?" Lurok hesitated. "We don't actually know, sir. No one's gotten close enough to check." The Admiral ground his fangs. This was getting out of hand. Where was he last spotted? Lurok swallowed. "Sector 5, the refinery outpost. We lost contact 2 hours ago." Ritter turned sharply. "And you're telling me no one sent a scout team?" Lurok gave him a helpless look. "Sir, we did." A silence settled over the room. Ritter exhaled. "Fine. I want a full battalion there. Now. And this time, I want them to burn the jungle. No more playing games." A chorus of confirmations echoed through the bridge. The Empire was done underestimating this thing. The refinery was in ruins. Massive, metallic structures once used to extract resources lay in smoking heaps. Imperial bodies were scattered across the ground, some still clutching their weapons, others frozen mid-scream. The air smelled like burnt fuel and failure. Sergeant Drawl led the reinforcements into the wreckage, blaster held tight, his squad moving in careful formation. "Eyes up," he ordered. "The moment you see anything that moves, he dies." "Got it." His squad nodded, but the tension was thick. They had all heard the stories. They all knew this was a death sentence. A soft clang echoed through the wreckage. Drawl raised a fist. "Hold." Nothing but silence. Then a chuckle, a low, amused sound, distorted slightly through a voice modulator. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Drawl's blood turned to ice. "Did you guys really think bringing more bodies would help?" The soldiers spun in different directions, aiming at shadows. "Nothing. I mean, I get it. Strength in numbers, right? But see." A distant explosion lit up the jungle in the distance. "You brought numbers." A second explosion. "I brought tactics." Drawl's radio erupted with screams. He turned just in time to see a figure drop from the rafters above them. The super soldier landed like a ghost, knees bending smoothly before exploding into motion. Drawl barely had time to yell before the first soldier went flying, slammed so hard into a steel beam that his body left a dent. Blaster fire lit up the refinery, but the human wasn't there anymore. He was already among them. A knife flashed, carving through armor like paper. A soldier stumbled backward, clutching his throat. Drawl tried to fire, too slow. A boot connected with his wrist, twisting his weapon away. The human flipped backward, grabbed a rifle midair and opened fire, cutting down 3 Imperials in a heartbeat. Panic set in. "Fall back. I can't see him." A body crashed into Drawl, knocking him down. He rolled, gasping, only to see the last of his men collapse, their helmets shattered, their weapons useless in their dead hands. The super soldier stood over him now, visor glowing in the dark. "You're not a soldier," Drawl gasped. "You're the monster." The human crouched slightly, tilting his head. "Monsters kill indiscriminately," he said. "Me? I'm just cleaning up a mess." Drawl clenched his fists, shaking. You can't stop the Empire. We're infinite. We will always return." The super soldier sighed, as if bored. "See, that's what the last guy said." Drawl frowned. "The last guy?" The human tapped his wrist of ice. The refinery rumbled beneath them. Drawl's eyes widened. "Wait, The charges went off. Fire erupted from the depths of the refinery, tearing through the structure. Metal beams twisted. Flames surged, and within seconds, the entire facility collapsed in on itself. The human was already gone. Drawl barely had time to scream before the explosion swallowed him whole. Back on the command ship, Admiral Ritter stood frozen, watching the refinery's destruction in real time. No survivors. Not one. The transmission ended, leaving only static. The room was silent. Then, a voice cut through the silence. It was him. The bridge's hollow display flickered, revealing a grainy, distorted image of the super soldier. He stood among the wreckage, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Hey, Admiral," the human said casually. "You still think this is just a one-man problem?" Ritter's jaw tightened. The super soldier smiled. "Because I've got news for you." The transmission cut off, and just before the screen went dark, a dozen more figures stepped out from the shadows behind him. The Imperial War Council had never been this quiet. The massive, coldly lit chamber, once filled with the proud boasts of generals and admirals, now felt suffocating. Nobody spoke. Nobody so much as breathed too loudly. The holoscreen at the center of the room was still flickering with the last image no one wanted to believe, a grainy, distorted transmission from the refinery site, its final moments showing not one, not two, but over a dozen armored figures stepping into view. There had only ever been one. Now there were more. Grand Imperator Sci Fi sat on his throne, unmoving. The shadows beneath his deep-set eyes twitched ever so slightly. His mandibles clicked in slow, measured movements. The warlords beneath him had learned to recognize the signs. Sci Fi was thinking, and for the first time in his entire rule, he was thinking about survival. "We do not know if they are all like him," Admiral Ritter finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to continue. Perhaps they are weaker copies. Not as fast. Not as deadly." Sci Fi exhaled slowly. "And what if they are not?" Ritter hesitated, his throat tightening. The Grand Imperator rose, pacing toward the massive war map. The usual red markings of occupied territories, of planets under their dominion, no longer felt like an advantage. For the first time, Sci Fi saw something else. A weakness. "This war is shifting," he said at last. "We have fought countless species, wiped out entire civilizations. But there was always a pattern." He turned, facing his assembled warlords. They would surrender, or, at the very least, break. That is how war functions. No one argued. It had been the foundation of the Galactic Empire's rule. But these humans, his mandibles twitched again. They did not break, even after we crushed their worlds, even after we outnumbered them, even after we sent our finest soldiers to erase them. He turned back to the holoscreen, rewinding the last moments of the transmission. The fire, the shadows, the dozen figures emerging from the darkness. He let it play again, and again. The warlord stood frozen, forced to watch as the image repeated itself. One man had been bad enough. But now, Sci Fi finally spoke, his voice lower this time. "This is not a war we are prepared to fight." The words hung in the air, more shocking than any explosion, more powerful than any fleet. Sci Fi, the supreme ruler of the Empire, the one being who had never admitted weakness, was saying what no one else dared to say. They were afraid. Across the room, General Kraun, one of the more seasoned warlords, cleared his throat. "We still have the numbers, the fleets, the factories. We could build new weapons, perhaps even develop countermeasures to..." Sci Fi waved a clawed hand, silencing him. "Do you think we are the first empire to believe that?" Kraun stopped. The room grew even colder. Sci Fi sat back down on his throne. "Send orders to the remaining commanders on the front lines. All forces are to pull back from contested human territories." A murmur swept through the chamber. "Pull back?" Ritter asked, incredulous. "We have never..." Never encountered an enemy like this, Zypher interrupted. He pointed to the screen, his many eyes narrowing. That man took out battalions. And then, when we finally believed we had contained the threat, he revealed that he was not alone. A long pause. Zypher leaned forward, his voice a dangerous whisper. Tell me, Admiral, if one of them was a problem we couldn't handle. He let the implications sink in. The murmur stopped. The fear set in. Zypher exhaled slowly. We cannot afford to make another mistake. This is no longer a simple rebellion. This is an infestation. And before we resume this war, we need to understand what we are truly facing. Admiral Ritter finally lowered his gaze, nodding stiffly. Yes, Supreme One. For the first time in history, the Galactic Empire was retreating. Far away, beyond the Empire's scanners, hidden in the shadows of a ruined battlefield, the super soldier knelt beside a smoldering wreck. His visor reflected the distant glow of the retreating Imperial fleet. Patel, his second-in-command, leaned against a charred beam, watching them go. They're pulling back, she murmured, half disbelieving. The super soldier didn't answer right away. He watched the warships disappear into the void, the weight of what had just happened settling in. Finally, he spoke. They'll be back. Patel scoffed. Oh yeah, with a lot more guns. The super soldier turned slightly, glancing at the others. The remaining 12 enhanced soldiers, each one a weapon in their own right. The Empire had no idea what was coming. He stood, tightening his grip on his rifle. Good, he said, a smirk barely visible beneath his visor. Let's give them a reason to stay afraid